This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today I'm going to talk about one major reason that your spouse does not get into therapy that you never thought of. I'll bet maybe you did, but it's a better title to say that you didn't. And before that, I'll tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was how to make 2025 better than this past year, just for my subscribers. So a pep talk using all of the strategies that you would learn in coaching or therapy. And of course, if you ever need a therapist or a coach, reach out to me and my team at Best Life Behavioral Health. Now, speaking of therapy, there's a lot of people who ask their spouse to get into therapy and their spouse doesn't. And then frequently these people think that they are better than their spouse because they themselves have been on a journey of self-exploration, blah, 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 and they're trying always to improve, blah, blah, blah. And I say blah, blah because these people are pretty into this story. They are fairly smug about it, not very humble. And they really think that they're the shit, for being in therapy. And then on the other hand, their spouse is not as good as them. They don't say this outright. Sometimes they do say it outright. But they say basically you will not go to therapy, so therefore you don't want to learn and grow and evolve. And that is a bad thing. And that's what's wrong with you. And that's why we're growing apart, because I'm so into self-improvement and you're not. And sometimes the person, says, oh, I will get into therapy. And sometimes they say, no, I'm really not comfortable with that. But now here, I hope you're sitting down. I hope you're not driving because it'll cause a pileup. Now, there may be a reason that they thought of your spouse, which underlies them not going to therapy. And believe me, you're not going to like it. You know what it is? Well, this is not interactive, but if it was, you could raise your hand. But I'll tell you, since I can't see anyone, it's that they think the therapist is going to tell them to leave you. Oh my God, you say, me? I'm a paragon of self-development. I'm the most actualized man/woman in the world. What in the world? How could somebody tell them to leave me? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the sort of person that harangues their spouse about getting into therapy and not being as self-actualized as this person themselves, is usually kind of a difficult, self-involved person. And I love therapy. Obviously, I'd be a fool if I wasn't a proponent of therapy. But there's some people who use therapy as a bludgeon to their spouse to say, look how great I am. Another way that I'm better than you. And in reality, and I'll get into more of what this dynamic looks like in a second, but in reality, this person is just not being nice to their spouse. They look down on their spouse, and this is just another way that they can look down on them. And they want their spouse to be something different, although something different wouldn't have been attracted to them and wouldn't be maintaining a relationship with them, which we'll get to in a sec. And the reality is that this person, this spouse, if they went into therapy, they instinctively know, because you know what, their friends or their family or whoever may not really like this person that they're married to, Mr./Miss Self-Actualization. They may come off different than they realize, You can see this in couples therapy, by the way. If you get into couples therapy, then everything becomes more obvious and the interplay and the dynamic becomes more obvious between the people. But there's a lot of people in the world that are going into therapy and they pick therapists who just kind of yes them to death and make them feel like they don't have really anything to change and everything was their parents' fault or somebody's fault and not them. And so they emerge from therapy kind of worse like more self-involved. And then they turn around to their spouse and they say, why aren't you in therapy? And it's like another way for them to look down on somebody. And meanwhile, the other person, the spouse, thinks, if I went into therapy, they might tell me to leave you. Kind of, they may dislike you the way that I've seen other people dislike you in our lives, respond to you poorly, because you don't know how you come off and how much you look down on me and how obvious that is. And I'm scared that if I went to therapy, it would force my hand to actually think about you differently. So I try to think about you as, kind of selfish, a little difficult, childlike maybe, but overall well-meaning. But if I said all the things that happen in this house to a therapist, they might be like, why do you let this person treat you like shit? And then I would have to reckon with that. And that's what they don't want to do. So, for example, a woman that's always telling her husband to get into therapy because he's not self-actualized, and he's thinking, man, I don't have time to self-actualize because you do very little around the home. Also, you don't work. So my life is going to work, coming home, doing the chores. We don't have sex because you say I'm not self-actualized enough for that. And I'm scared, honestly, that if I told a therapist about this, about our relationship, they would say, why are you letting this woman treat you like shit? Kind of like people give me the side eye in our shared, family, although I try very hard to make sure that nobody knows what goes on, and friends and what have you. And I don't want to deal with that because I'm not ready to think about that, and I don't want to break up this family. So that's kind of a common one, right? And I'll get to why this person, I've gotten into this. If you have low self-esteem, you get into these situations where you get treated like shit, And if you were treated like shit as a kid, then you get into those situations. Or if you saw a parent treat another parent like shit, then you get into these situations where a spouse is having you do mostly everything, and on top of it, they criticize you. And then, or for example, if you gender invert it, because I see it equally in both genders. So it's a man who's constantly up his wife's ass to change and to grow and to self-actualize. And usually this comes along with other things that he wants her to do differently in bed, or he wants her to dress differently, or he wants her to exercise more, or he wants her to be more assertive with the kids. I have a whole podcast on the only reason he probably picked her was because she was not very assertive with him, right? And then, of course, she's going to be the same with the kids as she was with him. But anyway, so then he thinks this, and she knows that if she goes to a therapist, or she guesses that if she goes to a therapist, the therapist is going to say, your husband treats you like shit. Your husband talks down to you all the time. Your husband has problems with everything. And then, of course, the therapist would help the person learn to be more assertive and confident. And the woman doesn't want that because that could force her hand and make her have to get out of the marriage, or have to think about getting out of the marriage, or have to think more clearly about the dynamic being observed by her children. So she's trying to put her head in the sand, and she fears that the therapist would not allow her to do it. And therefore, she would have to reckon with the reality, which is that she's trapped in a bad dynamic. So who gets into these kind of dynamics so the person who is the one in therapy, the one who does criticize, that person usually has many self-absorbed traits. They usually grew up, there's two paths to creating somebody with narcissistic traits. Either they were always told how great they were, or, and more commonly from what I see in practice, is that they were really kind of shit on, like they were treated poorly as a child, and they had to develop, as I've talked about before, this false self where they think that they're really great because somebody has to. And however, they don't really learn how to be in loving relationships, and anybody who they pick, it has to be a representation of themselves. So they want this person to be a perfect person so that this person can be at this high level that this person who was treated poorly as a child feels that they need to be at in order to compensate for everything. So this is a man who is like treated poorly as a kid, and his fantasy is to walk into a room with like this beautiful, confident wife, and then that's gonna be part of what makes everything better and heals all the wounds. Or the woman who was treated badly as a kid, right? or who was thought of as the ugly one or the stupid one, or who was just abused or neglected or what have you. She has a fantasy of being with this alpha male, right? Alpha male would not last 2 seconds with how critical and self-involved she is, right? But, and also, remember, there's a lot of aftermath of growing up in a home where you feel terribly low self-esteem because you are getting shit on, basically, and a lot of that is depression, anxiety, addiction. Like, there's a lot of other shit going on. So that's why she's like, in the one of the examples that I gave you, that's why she's not functional. That's why she doesn't work, or maybe she does work, but then she doesn't do stuff around the house, or maybe she does stuff around the house, but she yells at the kids so much that he's always taking the kids away from her. There are usually consequences to growing up in a very difficult home. And so this person instinctively created somebody who they could walk all over. Chose somebody who they could walk all over and who would deal with all of their problems. But because, now here's the really big irony, because this person, they picked so well, somebody who is going to enable all of their dysfunction and pretend that it didn't exist. Because that's the ideal, right? So let's say this woman, she picked a man. She wasn't going to pick a man, the alpha that now she fantasizes about, that she thinks her husband should go to therapy and learn to be more assertive, more of an alpha, more of a real partner to somebody like her, who's always on a journey of self-exploration. But she forgets that she can't do regular stuff, whether it's getting along with people, whether it's parenting, whether it's work, whatever the case may be, right? And she picked somebody from the earliest dating stages who this man grew up also in a bad home and learned to be codependent. So he fills in around her. I have a podcast, Are There Really Men Who Do Everything? It's this type of man. He fills in everything to the point that she does not even know and remember how dysfunctional she is. And then she can say, oh, I'm amazing because I go to therapy every week and I self-actualize so much. But in reality, he is allowing her to forget that she has these vast deficits in her mental health that allow her not to do anything in various ways, because he fills in all of the gaps. Same exact thing with the man in the situation. Of course, I see him more there because frequently these men, they go to work, they come home, the woman does literally everything else and often works, because 75% of women work. And because she never calls him out on it, never asks him to be more of a partner in the home, never has any needs of her own, tries very hard never to criticize him because he goes fucking apeshit and he can't tolerate it and he turns it back on her. And so she's walking on eggshells around him all the time. It's like she does such a good job in pretending that the house is normal that he actually forgets the fact that he has this whole dysfunctional side, that a more confident woman, the woman he imagined she would be if his wife got into therapy, would not deal with him for 5 minutes. Not for 5 minutes. We have like jokes in my secret Facebook group. Everybody should join my secret Facebook group with some of the women with less confidence. There's some of us, some other women, myself and some other women, who are like, just give me like 5 minutes with your husband, like literally 5 minutes to be like, wait, hold up, you're criticizing me? You take a look in the mirror. Do you do X? Do you do Y? Do you do Z? Do you do A, B, C? Do you do the whole alphabet? Do you do anything except preach about how wonderful you are? But the woman with the problem, in this same problem that I'm talking about, has never said any of that. She was trained since being a child to just allow people to treat her like shit and not call them out on it. So then she ends up in this bizarre, or I gave, gender examples of both for each gender. But this person ends up in this Looney Tunes Twilight Zone situation where they're being told that they ought to self-actualize and become even better with a therapist, when the only reason that the marriage even works is because they are filling in all of these gaps in this super codependent way, allowing the other person to think that they are so healthy, when in reality they are not, and they're also pretty mean. Of course they are, because they're telling the person all the time, something's wrong with them, oh, something's wrong with you, you got to fix yourself, you got to go to therapy, look how great I am, I'm in therapy. So what do you do about this situation? Well, first of all, if it resonates with you, you're going to laugh. But if it resonates with you, you should get into therapy, because the point of the matter is you're not teaching your kids anything good by letting somebody shit all over you. You're really not. And if you're the partner who's doing the shitting, this could be a wake-up call. First of all, you should think, am I in the sort of therapy where I'm told that I'm great all the time? Because people do not need that. I mean, the majority of people do not need that. Now, the non-assertive partner, that's the person who needs somebody to say, hey, you know what? You're not actually a piece of shit. You have all of these good traits. However, you're also like a flaming codependent. So let's work on that. You should never be in therapy where you're working on nothing and all you do is bring in your wins, and then you guys crack the champagne metaphorically, and everybody, it's like a party about how wonderful you are. Or it's a party about how much you've been victimized, and always somebody else gets blamed, and it's always a poor you. Neither of those is productive. And those are fantasy worlds, and people emerge from those fantasy worlds worse, and they look down on other people more, because they've been brainwashed into thinking that like everything they do is wonderful and everything that they do wrong is somebody else's fault. And so you can really think about that. Is your therapy something where you feel challenged to grow? Is your therapist helping you be a more empathic person, in fact, towards your spouse? Because that is a major thing to do. If you want to stay in your relationship, or even if you want to leave your relationship, it's always going to be better if you understand your spouse. But if your therapist colludes in any sort of looking down on your spouse and saying, oh yeah, you poor you, your spouse sounds terrible. And then never, hammers into the nitty gritty. Yeah, your spouse who does all the laundry, all the cooking, listens to you tell them that they're a piece of shit, keeps the kids away from you, wakes up in the middle of the night with the children, all of this, whatever the case may be. Yeah, they sound like they're really the problem. No. Now, there is the possibility, of course, I've discussed before, therapists are people. And if you're a very, very strong personality, and whenever the therapist brings something up that isn't what you want to hear, then you get kind of upset, and then you say, no, that can't possibly be right. Well, then it'll probably take longer and longer for you to actually open yourself up to hear anything. But also some therapists are just supportive listeners, and they will just say, yeah, that sounds good, and give you a safe space. But in those cases, this personality type that kind of created this, narcissistic, self-involved persona as a reaction to an abusive childhood or a neglectful childhood or an invalidating childhood, then that person's going to emerge with this kind of I'm better than you because I'm in therapy sort of motif that they tell to their spouse. So another very quick solve for this, of course not quick once you're in it, but get into couples counseling, right? And then somebody can see the actual dynamic and point out like why you're like, oh, you seem to kind of be really rough on your spouse here. Is this always how it is? And that could be like illuminating for you to see that it's not your spouse that's the problem. Maybe the dynamic has become very crazy, very dysfunctional. All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed this, even though I was recovering from a bit of a sore throat. And I hope you found it interesting, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys.